Hi, I'm Robert Garmon. I'm a philosopher and educator coming to you live from my lovely and oh so professional studio here in Dalian, a city in northeastern China. Everyone is currently quite obsessed with this Wuhan coronavirus, and with very good reason. When this first broke out, there was a lot of paranoia going around, people likening this epidemic to the Spanish flu of 1918, warning that a huge percentage of the world's population is going to die. I don't happen to be in this camp. However, this is a very serious matter. I've seen a lot of commentary out there, some of it excellent, most of it flawed. I have my own unique views on this issue, informed by my background as a philosopher and as a longtime resident of China. I've planned out a series of videos, each of them laying out a different aspect of what I see as the importance of this outbreak. In this video, I'm going to focus on my own personal experiences, what I see and hear around my hometown of Dalian. Of course, my purpose here is to give you an idea of what this means for your life. So my observations will be mainly focused on what is the right level of concern about this disease. And to understand that for any disease, not just this one, there are two main issues. Number one, how likely are you to get it? And number two, once you've got it, how bad is it? The first one you can think of as the rate of spread, or technically the R naught is how they define it. The other one, the severity, can be defined in different ways, but the biggie is case mortality rate. In other words, to put it bluntly, if you get it, how likely are you to die from it? I'm going to leave the technical discussion of both of these issues to some others who are much more qualified than I am. I'll put some links below. I happen to be a PhD, not an MD, so I'm not going to get too deep into those issues. What I will say is, based on the best data that I've seen so far, this disease spreads about twice as quickly as the flu, an R naught of about 2 to 3 from what I've seen. And it's several times more likely to kill you if you get it. About 2.3% case mortality rate versus about 0.5% for the flu. So those are both pretty serious, huge reasons to take this very seriously. However, this is not the zombie apocalypse. This disease is much closer to the flu on both of those measures than, for example, polio was. Or if you like something a little closer to recent memory, Ebola had a case mortality rate something in the 40s. 40% of people who caught it died from it. So this is considerably less severe than that. So, enough of the technical stuff. I mentioned that I live in Dalian in northeastern China. Now, we are a second-tier city, considered mid-sized by Chinese standards, which means there are only about 4 million people inside the city proper, and exurbs bring that number a little higher. So it's urban enough that you really wouldn't want a major outbreak inside the city itself. Most people here live in densely packed clusters of high-rise buildings, which is perfect for spread of disease. On the other hand, Dalian also happens to be relatively out of the way, which is something that I curse most of the time, but now I'm not so upset about. We're out on a peninsula, so we're not on the rail line from anywhere to anywhere. And we're pretty far out of central China. We're about 1,100 kilometers from Wuhan as the crow flies, or if you drove it, because there's a big wet bay in the way, it's about 2,000 kilometers to drive. So call it roughly 700 miles and 1,200 miles, respectively. In other words, we're nowhere near the epicenter of this disease. Knock wood. That said, we were one of the first cities outside Wuhan to report a confirmed case of the disease. It was a business traveler who came back from Wuhan with a little extra baggage. That was announced right around January 20th, just before the Chinese New Year holiday break. Perfect timing. So since then, Dalian has gone from cautious to alert to shut down to what I currently call a soft quarantine, really very soft. We're now roughly 25 days into the city shutdown, or if you like, we're at day 32 of our 7-day New Year holiday. Dalian has 19 confirmed cases last I checked, which is not a huge number out of a city of 4 million people. I personally don't know anyone who has or has had the disease, nor do any of my wife's friends have such experience. At my workplace, everyone is required to sign in daily, not literally, but we do it by WeChat. There are a total of about 40 employees and 50 kids. So far, no one has reported having the disease or having it in their immediate family. So far, so good. Nevertheless, officials in Dalian are taking this very seriously. Except for certain essential businesses like grocery stores and drugstores, all businesses were shut down by government decree until I think it was February 3rd, which is a full week after the official end of the New Year's holiday. For big employers like factories that were theoretically allowed to reopen, that first week was just for employees to check in, get their temperature checked, and for management to come up with a disease management plan. So for instance, they had to have plans for how to keep all outsiders out of their factory, no visitors of any kind. You had to be an employee to come in. Check for symptoms repeatedly every day. Disinfect all surfaces multiple times a day. If you found someone with symptoms, how to isolate them very quickly and without infecting others. Those kinds of things. Common sense ideas, but hopefully effective ones. In general, not just in those big factories, anyone who's traveled at all, even between districts of the same city, is required to undergo a 14-day quarantine. Now, for the big companies, for smaller, like if I had that situation, we would be quarantined at home. But for the big companies, they're required to put them up in a government-approved hotel, really more like what we'd call a youth hostel kind of place, at company expense for 14 days with meals provided and regular temperature checks. A friend of mine estimated that about 60% of the workers at his factory were able to come back right away, and about 40% were under quarantine. Now, that's a relatively good number because this particular area of China doesn't have a lot of migrant workers coming in. I would expect that number to be much more ugly in the places like Shenzhen in southern China, where there are a lot of migrant workers coming in. So to have 60% of your workforce coming back to work right away is actually pretty good. I would expect factories in Shenzhen to have significantly more people under quarantine. Now, about 2 weeks later, according to my friend, as workers have been incrementally coming back to work, they're still at only about 20% of their pre-disease output. And they estimate they'll be back at full production in March. So that's a significant economic hit. Because Dalian hasn't been terribly hard hit in terms of case numbers, the quarantine here for those who haven't traveled ramped up very slowly, and it's still very soft. About 2 or 3 days ago, my wife and I were given what they're officially translating as passports to leave home. Literal translation would be more like permission to walk around, and there it is. And you can see there's an official stamp over here, and this is the front side. It's got my name, phone number, passport number, and address. And then on the back, there's a grid for the days. And theoretically, they could use this to limit the number of times that anyone is allowed to leave home. In harder hit cities, that's exactly what they've been doing for weeks now. Typically in the cities where there are more cases, and so the quarantine is more what I call hard quarantine, they will allow one person from each household to leave home one time every 2 days at most. And you have to have that stamped on your little card thingy, so you can't cheat on it. So if you forget to buy the rice when you're at the supermarket, tough luck. No sign of that happening here in Dalian at this point, but obviously they're set up for it in case it comes to that. Here in Dalian, at the larger complexes, you do in fact have to show this card in order to come or go. You can't even go visit your friends, your parents, if you don't happen to live in that same complex. They won't allow anyone in without that little card thingy. My particular complex is very small, so the old-timers who hang out at the front gate playing mahjong every day know everybody, so they don't actually require us to show that little card. However, they do pay attention. A few days ago, I was gone for a couple of hours on a trip to the big Carrefour store here, and they asked my wife where I was going, when I was going to be back. So they are checking up on us. People are still allowed to drive around here in Dalian, although there's very little reason to. City buses are running on a decreased schedule. People are allowed to shop for groceries and the like, but not allowed to congregate for any other reason. Some relatives of my wife's went to dinner at their parents' house on a farm outside Dalian, and the police very quickly showed up to chase them away. Then when you do return home to any of the larger apartment complexes, there are checkpoints where you have to have your temperature checked. My complex is too small, they don't bother wasting the resources on that, but at the larger ones they do. And the government is paying hawkish attention to the incidence numbers as people are slowly going back to work, looking for any sign of a new spike in incidences. So far, all the evidence seems to be that there hasn't been a big new rise in cases. Here's one, I think this is sort of a funny little aspect of this. They have barred drugstores from selling any medicines to treat cold and flu. So aspirin, any fever medicine, cough suppressant, decongestants, anything to treat the cold or flu. Why? They want anybody who's got the sniffles to have to go to the hospital so that they can get treatment and get tested for the virus. Gotta say that's pretty clever. It is what it is. So that's the nature of the quarantine we face here in Dalian. The current best guess is that quarantine will be gradually lifted in March. I've heard the date March 10th, although that's in the status of rumor. It's not officially confirmed by any means. Public school kids have begun taking classes by the internet already, and some universities have done so or discussed perhaps doing that for the entire semester via online learning. I expect schools may not even come back into session. They may do all their courses this semester by online learning. Incidentally, pro tip, if you happen to be interested in investing in China, I expect a big spike in online learning companies. As people get accustomed to the phenomenon, they might think, hey, this is something that they become accustomed to it. It's not a novelty anymore. So I would expect that to be a growth industry in the wake of this disease. But that's not my purpose here. Kindergartens and training schools I expect will start reopening around the end of March here in Dalian. Now, the full quarantine in Dalian with the little cards and temperature checks everywhere didn't get implemented across this city until just a few days ago. And oddly enough, just about that same time, I started noticing a distinct lightening of people's anxiety. You go to the grocery store, there are more people there, more cars on the road. People seem to be more relaxed than they used to be. Vigilant, to be sure, but a little more at ease. Now, of course, I'm talking about areas of China that are far away from the hardest hit areas. Remember, we have only 19 cases in a city of 4 million. Hubei province, where Wuhan is the capital, would be a whole different story. Now, I'm sure by now there are a whole bunch of people calling BS on me. After all, I've depended heavily for this discussion on government numbers, government statements, and government plans. And we've seen from the course of this virus that you can't always rely on government statements. You can't take any government's pronouncements at face value, least of all the Chinese government's. However, I think the evidence is very clear that the doomsday scenario is not the reality. And that will be the subject of another video. So thank you for watching. I hope you found these remarks to be interesting and somewhat informative. And of course, the official YouTube mantra, don't forget to like and subscribe.